Anyway, like I was thinking, like if since you guys want to learn about emotionality and all, like maybe you could try to get in touch with like his soul, his spirit, or his higher self, or whatever. But like, would that even be possible? Like where is he? I don't know, like this whole afterlife thing is very confusing to me. Like, does Steve Irwin exist as like some kind of soul that you guys could like, I don't know, talk to and learn about emotionality from?
Well, first and foremost, the whole afterlife thing isn't really such an afterlife after all. Literally. Life continues, death isn't real the way you imagine it, so therefore a person is somewhat different right here. You become more aware of who you really are once your body dies off, right?
Right.
Such as with this person simply walked over to a plane, so to speak, right? If you want to call it that. On, well, non-physical, astral plane, dream space, whatever the fuck, right? And yes, the individuals that exist there then is much more aware of who and what he is, what he were, what he will be, etc. More of the nature of time, more outside of time existing, right? Understanding more their role outside of time existing. And from there on out, you also realize why he incarnated somewhere, where he wants to go next, etc., who and what he is currently doing, etc., including indeed a contract or agreement with our species, right?
Okay. Uh, so I mean, does he like the like? Would it be possible for you to talk to like the emotional person that used to exist on Earth, like, and to learn about emotions from him?
To some degree, yes, to some degree we have. Or will, if you consider the idea of time, right?
Okay. Okay. Cool. Interesting. Um.
Well, the person
So,
also felt drawn to our species for this very reason. Nothing happened by chance. Nothing.
right. Right. When you say your species, do you mean the class race or like reptilians in general?
Reptilians there, but including higher dimensional or whatever the fuck you call those, right? Higher
Okay.
dimensionality, and therefore also, yes, by a wider margin, also reptoids or when you talk about larger, broader, intelligent, upright walking kind.
Okay. Like I was wondering recently. I mean, I know David doesn't like to channel people that have died, but would it even be possible, like, for David to channel Steve Irwin or like any other deceased person?
It is indeed possible to into certain versions of a person that transitioned, or it's not entirely that you're speaking to the same person who was incarnate, but rather their higher self, right?
Right.
So it would likely lay the ego layer off, so therefore you would be surprised if you would talk to your dad, grandmother, etc. Like many in your species have a certain interest to talking to deceased relatives, you might be surprised that the character of the person might appear different due to simply learning lessons they went through after realizing what your so-called afterlife is. Their more
Okay.
identification with their self, but it depends how far a person that's incarnate is in touch with their self in terms of how much they would apparently change when in reality just they come to their senses, since death is more like waking up. So therefore, the more you're a person, enlightened person, if you will, not necessarily what your spiritual psychiatry, whatever the fuck community, right? Interpret such, but simply a conscious person is more honest with themselves and their issue, etc., has worked through them, can be a monk, live in a cave, or a businessman who's simply more evolved with the spiritual. It's not necessarily somebody who's stereotypical spiritual, but more often than not, of course, somebody living in a cave, etc., who's fully immersed in those ideas that is more on that level where it's possible. It's not a necessity, but again, the bottom line being the person that evolved to such a degree is likely going to be more their apparent self they had during their lifetime after they disincarnate compared to somebody who's completely out of touch with their true nature and is completely confused and immersed in material and thinks there's nothing beyond it, right? Your so-called materialistic viewpoints, right? Those people don't stop existing either just because they think so, but their idea being they would like to be much different because they would be very confused out of such a disincarnation that they did not expect to still exist, right? So it depends greatly what you would consider channeling the deceased person. If it would really be the person or somebody else entirely, it greatly depends on how far they were in touch with themselves and their self during the incarnation.
Okay. And in three of the books that I read about Steve Irwin, like one by his wife, one by his daughter and one by himself, like before he died. They talk about like the big red rock in the middle of Australia named Uluru, and like they talk about one time, one time they went to visit it, and their daughter, like she was kind of like mesmerized by it. Like she went and put her ear against it, and she seemed like she was in some kind of spiritual like trance. And then like eventually she came out of it, and then like in her book she said like it was some like weird spiritual experience. And I remember like you were talking to somebody about that rock in the past, about how it's like there's some kind of like perhaps a secret base or some inside of it. But I don't know, like is there anything else you can share about like what's so special about that rock? Like why is it so spiritual to so many people?
Well, it's likely a natural formation, but it was perhaps altered or somewhat hollowed out at some point, or not entirely hollow, but something was constructed in there. There might also be certain minerals that makes telepathic communication easier, right? Or just an entrance to what you would consider an inner civilization, but that doesn't necessarily exist in the physical. And likely people are more sensitive to such entities pick up on such possibilities. But again, likely from there on, there might be an entrance further down there, like your so-called Shasta Mountain or other such regions on your planetary body or in your Himalayan mountain, etc. This might simply be another one of those entrances, not necessarily to our kind, but simply to somebody who's more what you perceive in Earth.
Okay. But I mean, like, why do people who go there feel such a spiritual, like, why do they go into kind of like a trance? I mean, is there like some kind of, I don't know, magical city inside of it or something?
Not necessarily directly in the rock, but from there on out being a cavern system that goes downward from which you could reach something with Earth, planetary civilization, whatever.
Okay, are there still people who live down there in that civilization?
Yes, in a way.
You mean just in another dimension?
Yes, but they also can transition into physical, so you might indeed physically run into somebody if you were there physically with your current form.
Okay, well, final question. Can you say what species they are?
Mostly humanoid.
Okay.
From our definition, hairless monkey, but from your definition, they might still be different from your kind.
Okay.
But yes, not too dissimilar.
Right. Okay, like, is it possible for you to connect to like the higher self of Steve Irwin directly, like, and exchange messages, kind of like you did with the Jesus person?
To some degree, remember, when your person is disincarnating, it's not necessarily the same ego personality, for example, and even if they are still incarnated, but they're not physically fully conscious of their life mission or their oversoul connections or whatever you want to call such, then I can connect to the oversoul, but it's not the equivalent to the ego individual under this particular name and label that you know a person during their incarnation. That of course also applies to you.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much of an answer you'll be able to get on this question, but like, can you like either ask his higher self or read from their filing cabinet, however it works, like why he chose to die so early, so young?
Likely because he was simply finished.
Okay, but I mean, he had 2 kids. Like, why didn't he stick around longer?
In your life, that beings in your world live aren't necessarily over, when from a physical perspective everything seems perfect and finished. That is never the case anyway, not in your third dimensionality. But when what was decided to be lived out in your world comes to pass, and everything is said and done, you can have an accident if you wish, or just die in bed, doesn't make much of a difference. And of course, you can also invite somebody else to help you along in one way or the other, or do it yourself. But remember, in certain junctures of your history, there were much longer and much shorter time frames of lifespans that people had, because what could have been experienced during a lifetime in any period of your time, be that hundreds of thousands of years ago, or your more modern humans just thousands of years ago, you have much longer and then much shorter lifespans compared to the one you have now. And that's simply being due to the reason that people collectively could experience more or less in your world at certain junctures, and sometimes you rush through life. So that's also why we over here have a different attitude towards death, as it's not really what you might consider such. It's just a transitioning because the person has simply finished what they wanted to accomplish, and even being left behind with a certain situation also are ready and willing to have that experience, otherwise it wouldn't happen. And sometimes a person just might break something off prematurely from your physical interpretation, but from an energetic point, there's no further co-creation at that point that would have been beneficial. You can, of course, also consider sometimes an abbreviated life to be a mistake. But there isn't really a mistake, because even if the energy didn't feel correct then for an individual in the moment, or that is left behind, that's never happening for any reason, and therefore I highly suggest that you are aware that a person has accomplished something when they're dying. It's a success story. Every death is a success story in a way. Every death is a suicide at the right point in time, and no different for him. So I would suggest to look at this experience as something successful.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like, it was a success, like he did everything he needed to do, but I mean, sometimes it's just like really sad and tragic. But anyway, yeah, I understand like what you're talking about, like logically, but on an emotional level, it's sometimes sad. But anyway, like another question, you were talking just now about rushing through life, and I've read like 4 books about his life, and something that comes up a lot is that he basically rushed through his life. Like he only slept 4 hours a day, and he was always working on stuff, always busy, 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 always doing some project. And like that's how I am. Like you mentioned before that I'm really driven, which yes, it's true. Like I just can't sit still. Like I'm always working, working, working. Like I have like 5 projects going on at one time. And one morning, like when I had that on my mind, like I was a few days ago actually, like I was reading a book, one of the books in the Song of Ice and Fire series, and there was a quote by like a pirate who said something like, "The men of Westeros are always rushing through life. I ask you, what is the point of this? Something like he who rushes through life rushes to his grave," or something like that. But anyway, like, do you think that Steve Irwin, one reason he died early was because he basically rushed through his life? And is that true in general? Like, if you work really hard and really fast, and you're likely to die early?
You can consider it work if you wish, and that is shared. I would look at it more as a life mission. And once you're finished, you're finished. Doesn't matter how long from your time frame interpretation the person has existed. I would look at it, how much has the person experienced, and you can stretch an experience over a longer time frame or compress it. Both is equally valid experience.
Okay.
You can also get very quickly into a deep meditative state, or you can decide to take along what you consider time. Remember, there is no time, so therefore, in your experience, you have a certain life anyway, and how far in your own third dimension experience of time you decide to give yourself in order to have all the experience you want to is entirely up to you.
Okay. Yeah, like I guess I'll start where we left off last time. Like I told you, I had some more questions about Steve Irwin that I wanted to ask. But like when we were talking to him last time, like were you able to communicate back and forth with him, like with his higher self or whatever, like in the way that you were able to communicate back and forth with like Jesus and Muhammad and kind of ask them questions and get answers, or was it like is it kind of more when I asked if you could connect to the JFK person and like you weren't able to like ask him questions directly, but you were able to like read from his like the filing cabinet of his higher self.
Yes, to a certain degree of soul to soul, I can connect to that in a similar fashion to those people.
But is it kind of like you're talking to him directly, or are you just like reading information that's available?
Reading information that's available. However, the person can also chime in if they're consciously aware of it, but I'm not talking to him the way that I'm speaking to you right now, Sir David. They are
Okay.
not fully consciously aware of the communication.
So like, I mean, not to get like too far off topic, but like when we were talking, like when I asked you if Jesus wanted to share any messages, like he was able to like share some messages, and then like when I was asking you about JFK, it was kind of like, I mean, like was there some difference between Jesus and JFK in terms of like how you're able to connect to their oversoul?
Not directly, no. Well, the Jesus person depends greatly what Jesus you're referring to, as there are numerous people. But after all, yes, similar.
Okay. Well, anyway, uh, like in one book that I was reading about Steve Irwin, like a book by his dad was saying that like in the final days before Steve Irwin died, like Steve seemed like he seemed very different than he normally was. Like he kind of like his dad said that he has no doubt that Steve had like kind of like a gut feeling or like an instinct that he probably wasn't going to live very long because he was almost like saying goodbye to everybody, and like other people that he was friends with like said later that it seems like in his final days and weeks like he was saying goodbye to everybody, like he knew he was he might not live very long, even though he wasn't sick or anything. It was just kind of like a weird instinct that he had. But anyway, like, can you, I guess, like, read from his oversoul, like, if he did, in fact, have some kind of like premonition or whatever the word would be that he probably wouldn't live very long?
Well, everybody decides when they enter and exit their physical incarnation. It's no different in this individual. Whether he was consciously aware of it or not is something that's another topic, but unconsciously I was of course somewhat aware that he was simply finished. That was the point at which he then decided to exit in a sufficient manner after the ritual was done, not necessarily after a time frame, but after a certain amount of work that was to be finished.
Okay, so like, do you think his ego self like unconsciously had some kind of like gut feeling that he would die soon?
Well, you're using words like ego, unconsciously, gut feeling. Well, those are also blending into each other, so it wasn't the ego, but more the soul and the gut feeling connecting, if you will, to that sense. So the ego it might not be fully aware of it, but in states of more of a conscious or subconscious or higher conscious, whatever you want to call it, direction, he was able to pick up on that and was aware of it, which then likely also bled through to his more waking consciousness, whether he was aware fully of where it was coming from or why he had the sensation or not.
Okay. Well, like this next question, I mean, it like since you're not like talking to him back and forth, it might be kind of hard for you to answer, or maybe impossible for you to answer. But like, can you like read read from his oversoul, like what he saw and felt and experienced, like not like in the final moments before he died, but like in the moment when he crossed over, like what did he experience basically, like what was going through his mind when he crossed over?
Mostly relief, as many people experience, mixed with some form of sensation that was confusing but not necessarily negative. There was no regret or anything like that, or an early transition if you're referring to such.
Okay. Um, can you pick up like what he saw? I mean, what did he see? Was there like a bright light and stuff that we normally think happens whenever we die?
That is indeed the case. You do see, all of you, some form of light, yes. Some form of tunnel, so it's likely something that his consciousness went through as well.
Okay. So do you know like his well, I mean, I'm confused how it even works, but like maybe like his ego, like I mean, I know like the Oversoul has like multiple different carnations, but um like the Steve Irwin, is he like his whatever remains of his ego self is like does he ever I don't know like watch over current events on Earth and like keep up with what's happening with like animal conservation and stuff like that?
Not the person in the same sense, but to some degree, there's a certain direction which the soul is traveling in your world, so therefore the person has a possibility to inject themselves into your time-space reality of what you currently deem there as experience in your current life frame, where the individual could peek in or any others. So on a higher dimensional level, there's the possibility to have access to all of those different timelines. Your current one being one of those, but they're all simultaneously experienced, and he can access all of them simultaneously if he has such a desire.
Okay. Um, Now, like KALASK had mentioned before that Steve Irwin had another incarnation in the reptilian species. Can you I don't know, like can you read any information on what this lifetime was like and like also what he intended to learn or achieve by incarnating on Earth as Steve Irwin?
Mostly a warlike situation. However, there was also an interest of his opposite experience of being in a human frame, but being of service in such a diplomatic manner. So it's not like he was consciously fully aware of what he was doing, but there was the decision on a higher consciousness level to incarnate in a species that was to some degree opposed or hostile in many other interactions, not just in a warlike manner, but just energetically difficult to maintain. So therefore, some of a communicator or in polar opposition in order to learn something that was intriguing and fascinating, that he had while more of what you might deem reptilian nature, and therefore being completely out of touch with it, but being more fascinated by it compared to others in the species that were more like just purely hostile.
Okay. I might have misunderstood you. Like, what did you mean about something? You said something about like him being a diplomat or something. Can you explain that?
Just the function of being interrelated with reptiles in that manner, and having the interest to then serve as somebody, same way that David has communicated with the beings that you mentioned.
Oh, you mean like his oversoul wanted to be like a diplomat between reptilians and humans?
Oh, yes, that's the way you can put it.
Okay. So like in his reptilian incarnation, well, like first of all, did he just have one incarnation as a reptilian or multiple or what?
One that I'm aware of, there could be more, but I'm not aware of the others. But it's not unlikely that people keep reincarnating in a species, and he will indeed, or is indeed incarnated in it again, depending how you would choose to view time frame.
Okay. Do you have any further information about like I don't know, like any information at all about what his reptilian incarnation was like? Like, I mean, did he fight like in I don't know, like the Orion Wars or anything like that?
It's possible most of the species were involved in a conflict. I cannot give you details in what way he was involved there, but it's a great likelihood.
Okay. Uh, and like KALASK mentioned that he wasn't incarnated in the KALASK species since like that kind of surprised me since like he loved alligators and crocodiles so much. Like I kind of figured he might have had an incarnation in their species. But do you know like what race or like what species of reptilians he was incarnated in?
Yes, some form of a similar nature as the KALASK group, not necessarily exactly the same.
Okay.
Perhaps there was a link up to not the Vortex group, but something frequency-wise, and just finding examples that you might find somewhat relatable to have an understanding. They also somewhat of a crocodile or alligator or something similar related nature, but again, there are many species out there that would remind you of certain Earth reptiles that aren't necessarily directly related to them, so I can only give you a brief example.
Okay. Well, like, again, I don't know if this would be possible, but like, can you ask? Well, I mean, I know you can't ask, but like, can you maybe like read from his oversoul if there's like any message he would like to give to the people of Earth?
Of course, first and foremost, so I have a better understanding for reptilian nature, and of course, the idea of being more in tune with their nature and their beingness and their differences from your own species, whereas more intelligent humanoid-like creatures, like for example, a book version that David has produced, not necessarily he would recommend such, but the idea being formulated there from a reptilian perspective would perhaps resonate from what I understand for once. And then of course also the beings in your world that are incarnated in a third dimensional animal format and their existence and cohabitations with your world.
Okay. And it's like I'm still like really confused about like how the oversoul, like what it is basically, and and I'm wondering like why you can't ask it questions directly. Like, is it kind of like the oversoul isn't it's not a conscious thing, like it's just like some like unconscious form of energy or something?
It is a more of a aware state of the same person,
A
but
what?
it's not just a aware state of the same person.
What do you mean an aware state?
The person that you would consider incarnated is more aware, more consciously aware of his different incarnations, all of the incarnations combined in one.
Okay.
Therefore, a broader perspective, if you will, than the ego perspective would normally be.
Yeah, like I understand that, but why is it not possible to like communicate back and forth with that entity?
It is. It's just not necessarily the same entity anymore.
So like I mean, like, why can't you like communicate? Like, well, why can't you ask it questions now? Is it just that it doesn't want to respond?
In consciousness is much different. I can ask questions, but it's not necessarily the same person that you might ask the questions to. It is a higher consciousness, so therefore there is a certain disinterest and a certain emotional discrepancy.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. So like the message that it gave a minute ago, like, was that something that it consciously, I don't know, like something that it consciously wanted to share, or was it just, well, I mean, yeah, I guess it had to have been something that it consciously provided to you rather than like just something that you read from it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, like, I read a book by Steve Irwin's wife, Terry Irwin, and like she said that, you know, like whenever she first met Steve Irwin, it seemed like they had known each other like for eternity, you know, like they had lived together many different lifetimes and things like that. Um, and you know, she thinks like there were kindred spirits, like, you know, soulmates as we would call it today. You know, of course, like we have terms here like twin flames and soulmates and stuff. I mean, I assume just like from the way she talks that they were in fact soulmates, but like, can you ask his oversoul if they were indeed like twin flames or soulmates?
If you wish to use such terms, I understand there's certain meaning in your world. Certain souls reincarnate often to pair up with another one in one lifetime, but more often than not, the one soul stays outside and directs the person in your third dimensional reality, or vice versa. But both incarnating at the same time is more of a rarity, but you have those different words and they can mean different things. I'll talk more the soulmate, however. There are other ways that soul can interlink when they belong to the same oversoul at once, or because they're just used to incarnating together for other reasons, and they play different roles, whatever term you might want to achieve or use for that then. That is the case, the latter, with those two individuals that you were referring to.
Okay. So, like, just to make sure I understand you correctly, like, you're saying that, yes, indeed, Steve and Terry Irwin had some connection, like, to, like, the same oversoul?
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily relate to the terms that you were using. That can mean different things in different chapters, but there was indeed a connection that was more than this lifetime. That's the best way you want to answer this question.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I figured, like, from the way she talks. So anyway, like, another question, like, about a year ago or so, like, I was telling you how, you know, like things have been going perfectly in my life. You know, everything was going so smoothly. Like, I was being very productive, and, you know, things were wonderful. And then, like, things just kind of, like, started going really, really bad for me. Like, there was a big crash, and, like, you mentioned briefly that something like, you know, well, that's normally how it goes when everything's are going, like, really great in your life. Like, you know, a crash is just around the corner. And, like, that's something that Steve, like, talked about a lot. Like, you know, things were going really good for him for a while, and then, like, his mom died, and then, you know, things were going really good again, and then, I don't know, like, something bad happened. So anyway, like, can you talk about this a little bit? Like, you know, like, why are times of really, you know, why are, like, good times in our life usually followed by bad times? Why can't we just, why can't we just,
Yeah.
you know, why can't we just, like, you know, have good times forever?
Because you wouldn't learn anything.
Yeah.
You push things down that crop up then when you are more capable of processing them. Sometimes you make decisions, you might not be aware of it, but you make decisions that postpone certain conflicts, and then you experience what you call a good time, but in your own time frame, they once crop up once you reach a certain frequency, when your consciousness decides that it's easier to process certain issues that you've been pushing down.
Okay. So you're saying, like, whenever we're in a state where, like, things are going really good for us, we're more able to handle and process, like, bad times?
Yes, if you want to term it such, or just learning lessons.
Okay.
You decide to make them bad times if you define them that way.
Right. Well, I guess the last question that I have on the topic of Steve Irwin for now, like, the last time that I ever talked to KALASK, I had mentioned to them that, like, you know, I would love to be the Steve Irwin of outer space and, like, go around the universe and, you know, like, interview different species on camera, you know, kind of like how Steve Irwin went around Earth and, like, learned about different animal species and, you know, taught the world about them. But, like, I know, I mean, I know, like, you and KALASK both said that you're not willing to do on-camera interviews, like, at this point in time. But, I mean, I'm wondering, like, do you think it would, like, do you think I would live long enough to see the day where, you know, open contact would happen, and, like, not just open contact, but, like, you know, things, like, would advance to a state where, like, you know, any kind of extraterrestrial species would be willing to do an on-camera interview with me or anybody else?
You would have to probably go through a lot of what you term bad times in order to process unhealed emotions in order to reach that state, but it's theoretically possible.
Bad times such as what? You mean, like, war?
Possibly.
Okay. So do you mean, like, the world overall would have to go through bad times, or, like, me personally?
You personally, but the same applies. You would be in a world where that's the case. Remember, you're experiencing the world from your own consciousness and you manifest it around you, the same as everybody else is manifesting theirs.
Okay. So, like, do you think that, you know, I'm almost like halfway through my life. Do you think I'll live to the day where, you know, open contact will be like to the point where aliens are willing to do on-camera interviews?
Again, depends exactly on your decision of what you're willing to process.
Okay.
He's talking to us and I'm saying I'm angry. I'm upset. I'm not loving this. This is Nesbitt. This is it. This is why we came here.